Good evening to everyone present here tonight in Malaysia. My name is Yu Yu and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. As we'd like to continue improving your experience with us, to the audience who are in Zoom, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during this broadcast. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. Do like and subscribe the channel so you can receive live notifications. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below in Zoom and in the chat box in YouTube. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the channel later on. American cellist Katie Tertell is a passionate chamber, orchestral, and crossover artist in high demand with some of Europe's leading ensembles. A former member of the RTE National Symphony Orchestra in Dublin, Ireland, Katie left her role in 2019 to explore her own collaborative projects, research, and works as a pedagogue. She is an artistic director and founder of the Appalachian Chamber Music Festival, which will celebrate its first season in 2021 in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and has recently joined the cello teaching staff at Durham University in the UK. Katie is the co-creator of Cello Power. Cello Power is a community for cellists and musicians to grow and thrive in a supportive and fun environment. Having won several awards, Ms. Tertell is a recipient of the prestigious Exceptional Talent Visa from the UK Arts Council and Home Office. She is also a current recipient of a DYCP grant from Arts Council England. Katie received a Leverhulme bursary through the Britton Pearce Young Artist Program in 2014, as well as a winner of numerous scholarships and competition prizes during her studies in the UK and US, including a full tuition scholarship at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. She has appeared as a concerto soloist on several occasions in both countries and looks forward to performing the Brahms Double Concerto later on this season. Ms. Tertell is actively involved in chamber music collaboratives and festivals within Europe and the US. In October 2020, she successfully completed an outdoor tour of Northeast England with her ensemble Tertell Baldour and also called Semi-Brief Music. which received critical acclaim and media attention due to the ambitious nature of the project and its relevance during the pandemic. Katie has performed at the Galway International Jazz Festival, Kilkenny Festival, Indelian, Spoleto Festival in USA, Spike Cello Festival, Laura Mazel Castleton Festival, John Lynch Chamber Music Series, National Concert Hall Chamber Series in Ireland, Bowie Festival in Dublin, and Kaleidoscope, among several others. A highlight of her year is performing annually at the Torrey Chamber Music Festival in Utah, USA. She has performed with Chamber Collective, Musici Ireland, Cello Ireland, and Fincino Ensemble, among others. Katie performs in live and recorded broadcasts for RTE Lyric FM and BBC Radio 3 on a near week. Ms. Tertell grew up near Washington, D.C. and is involved in various musical projects in the area. She has championed successfully charitable concerts in the area, including for So Other Might Eat in December 2019. She holds degrees in performance from Indiana University, Cleveland Institute of Music with highest distinction, and the Royal Northern College of Music, as well as Master in Suzuki Pedagogy from the Sato Center at the Cleveland Institute of Music. Her teachers and mentors include, among many, Jano Starker, Emilio Colon, Jolie Cruz, Peter Dixon, and Rolf Kirschbaum. So tonight's interview features Katie Tertell with her topic about Be Fearless, Finding Your Best Through Thoughtful Work Ethic. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, and sharing of knowledge and advice you have for all of us is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Katie joining us as our guest for tonight. I hope that you will all join me in giving her a warm welcome. Welcome, Katie.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Hello. Yes. So without further ado, once again, and a very welcome to Katie, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. To start off today's interview, what can you tell us about the video we had just watched?
Oh, it was so lovely to sit through and rewatch that video. It brings back lovely memories. That was in my second season at the RTE National Symphony Orchestra with some of my amazing colleagues in the orchestra, including Martin Johnson, who was our principal. And, you know, it's a really nice representation of a lot that I stand for, because I'm very into working with other cellists, which we'll hear about today. But also it's a way of highlighting that even if you're in a more traditional music role, there's a lot of other things that musicians do behind the scenes. Lots of cross-genre collaborations. As you saw at the end of the video, that was a cover recording, which just means our own take of a very famous U2 song, and U2 are a band from Ireland. So it was really nice to do that version of it. And, you know, that I believe I remember the day. It was a really nice, beautiful summer's day when we made that recording. And it was after we had done a lunchtime concert with the National Symphony Orchestra. So it's just a lovely memory. So I'm really glad you chose that video to share today.
Thank you for telling us about. So can you tell us about your musical journey that brought you to where you are today now?
Yes, definitely. Great question. And I was really delighted to hear from all of you at Jesselton, like all the things you're doing behind the scenes to bring people who might not have the same musical exposure that I've had in my life to these great, you know, interactive sessions and all the rest. I think it's fantastic. And I'm very passionate about that because of the way I started. A lot of professional musicians get into music because they have parents who are musicians, and I am not like that. Neither of my parents were musicians, actually. And you know, there's some really talented artistic people in my family, but when you don't have that background, sometimes people can feel they don't have the confidence to pursue music. So I was really, really lucky as a young person. I was introduced to music in my public school. And I don't know if public school in where you are means the same thing that it means to an American, but it means the schools that are run by the state. So it was, anyone can attend this school. So I was very lucky that I took to the cello. I really liked music, and I really liked the sound of the cello. I think a lot of musicians, you hear these stories about people and their beginnings sound so grandiose, and oh, of course they're a great artist because they, went on to, they were so moved at the age of 3. No, I wasn't like that. I was introduced to music. I was in the 4th grade. And I just liked the sound of the cello, but I was so lucky. I was so fortunate that I had a great teacher who noticed I had a keen interest and really, helped me find a path. And I guess there's a lot of things what I want to talk about today that I hope will be interesting and useful to your audience. But I think one thing is that don't underestimate your passion for something. A lot of times people feel they're not able to go on and do what they want to do because they don't have a certain background. And you know what? There are limits to everything in life, but I find that I wanted to title this Be Fearless, working, finding your best self through work ethic, because ethic in work is a lot of what makes us succeed in the field of music. That's my philosophy anyway. But more importantly, is to look at what drives that. Is it coming from a place of fear of failure, or is it coming from your truest desires that, we're all here watching this because we love music, and it's easy to forget that. And there's a lot of things that tell us, no, I have to be a certain way and I shouldn't engage with these impulses I had. Many of us come to music as young people, but not always. I think there's some advantages to bringing music into your life when you're older, in that you can relate better to what, sparked your interest in the first place. So for someone like me, who's been playing the cello now for, 25 years, I sometimes have to go back and think about myself as a child, and just the really basic, it's not a profound thing, but I just loved music. So, and anyway, you got a really thorough summary of my background there and that great introduction you did. But I think that my journey through music is really defined by being in touch with the passion that got me there in the first place. So I learned a lot along the way. I'm not saying I was perfect and I always made all the right decisions, but I think that being motivated by the love of music is what helped me succeed in life. And I was really lucky, as you said, to study at all these great places and all of the rest. But yeah, I guess I'll just tell you a little bit about my journey now, because it's in the classical music world that I live in Western Europe and the US. Many people see the end all be all of a career as landing a job in an orchestra, which of course is an amazing thing that we can do as professionals. And there's lots of other paths, of course, that are equally awesome. But I made a decision after being in a symphony orchestra and having the incredible privilege of doing that for 5 years, to leave and do other things. And so I feel that today I will be a lot about what I've been doing since then, to really be true to myself as an artist and to think about what other ways I can reach people and really make what we do through music important to the rest of the world.
Yes, thank you very much. Wow. Yeah, it's really inspiring, because that passion for music, like, I don't think, because I was a student, like a music student, but not a professional. I'm not studying music now, but the love, the passion for music, it doesn't stop me while, like, I'm doing, like, what I'm studying now. And how do I treat music? It really, even music, I'm not studying music, but it still pushes me to forward my studies and to help me during, like, difficult times. So music is really, I think it's really, it's just magical.
You're absolutely
So,
right.
mhm.
And it's wonderful that you're an amazing example in yourself of, you're here interviewing me, and how you still live through music even when it's not your career. It impacts everyone's life. And even if you have no desire to become a professional and you just want to learn to play an instrument, it doesn't matter where you are, what your level is, it has a great impact. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, no problem. So in your profile, we saw that there's you had a community. You've just built a community called Cello Power. Can you tell us what is Cello Power?
Sure, yeah, it's got a very cello nerdtastic name, Cello Power. It sounds like something for like, little boys action figures. It always makes people laugh, and that's part of the joke behind it. It's embracing that nerdiness about your instrument, which anyone who plays any instrument will know. They think their instrument's the best, don't they? But basically, this idea, Cello Power, which is a community we built on Patreon, really came from the birth of a long friendship and collaboration I have with an amazing cellist and composer named Alva McDonough. Alva is a teacher of cello at the Royal Irish Academy of Music, and she's a great friend and colleague of mine for years and years and years, and still is. But we used to play together all the time in Dublin in various settings, including in the orchestra. But so we, for a long time, and I'm going to get into a little bit about mentors later, but I also want to talk about the importance of peers. I think a lot of times in music, and this is true for so many other aspects of life, but we underestimate how important it is and how hard it is actually to be truly honest and try to work with our peers. A lot of times people don't know how to deal with that in music, and it either comes across as insecurity or competitiveness and all of that. But my philosophy about life is that when we're all trying to be our best at what we do and we're helping others be their best, it only makes the world a better place. I mean, if I am trying to work with a colleague to be a better cellist, and she's getting to be a better cellist, and we're all in this together, then it raises up the whole community of cellists. So that's the essence behind what we do. But it really came to being out of something we've been doing for years, which is learning really difficult cello repertoire together that we would play for each other. Because as you know, being a former music student, it's so important to have your weekly lessons with a teacher or mentor where you regularly perform and play through things that are not finished. It's very different from performing, because when you perform, you're playing something that you've worked on for years and years and years, that you've done so many times, but there's no real opportunities or places for us to do that as professionals. So we have to play to our peers in a safe environment. So we wanted to create an opportunity for people of all levels to do that, and also something aspirational to those who might be like, oh gosh, right now we're working on the Popper studies, which are very difficult technical pieces that you play to get better at specific aspects of playing. So it's not like everyone who comes on there is learning those at the moment or something like that, but it's aspirational to those who aren't. And it's just been really fun to do that with somebody who I have such massive respect for.
Yes, thank you for sharing with us. So, from the topic we have, can you tell us what does fearless mean? To be
Yeah,
fearless.
well, I guess I've alluded to it a bit already.
Yeah.
The idea of this was planted in my head actually at Indiana University with an amazing horn player. I think I'm going to butcher his last name, Jeff Nelson. He's a professor there, very, very famous French horn professor. And he introduced this idea because I don't know if everyone watching knows about the French horn, but it's considered in the orchestral world one of the hardest instruments, because if you sit down to play the French horn and you make one teeny tiny mistake, then the note cracks and everyone notices. I'm probably massively over exaggerating that because I don't play the horn. But anyway, he was in a unique position to talk about fearlessness and playing. And that's something that has really become a huge part of my ethos in both my teaching and my performance style and all of the rest. So I think that, again, I've just talked about the difference between lessons and performance. There's a really big difference. I think people sometimes underestimate that, we're constantly working and improving as musicians and artists. But when you step onto a stage, when you go into a public space, it's all or nothing. That is the moment where it doesn't matter if you mess up. It doesn't matter if you didn't sleep the night before. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a pandemic and you haven't performed to a live audience in 6 months. None of that matters. You just have to go out there and put everything on the line and perform. And a lot of people would say, well, why? Why do you have to do that? And I would remind somebody who asks that question about the first time they heard a piece of music in their life that just left them completely floored with how incredible it was. I have a very good friend who's a conductor who tells me that every performance he does of a really common piece of repertoire, like Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, which I probably played 30 times in the 5 years I was in the RTE Symphony, can get a bit, okay, I've done this a few times. You don't even have to concentrate after a while sometimes, with certain moments. It's not that you don't love it, but you have to remember the person who's watching who has never heard a Tchaikovsky symphony in their whole life. And that performance is going to change the rest of their life. And they will never forget it. And I think that's what it's so hard, because we're human beings and we have insecurities and worries and life. But when you go out on stage, you have to not only be fearless, but you have to think about the audience. You have to think about what you love about music and what you're going to be able to share through that. And I think that's the most important thing to remember. Again, this is my personal ethos and my personal idea, but I think the most important thing when you're performing is to perform with that love and passion and forget everything else. It's scary. Sometimes it's really scary. Tomorrow I have to play a up-bow staccato, very technical thing on the internet that's going to be very hard, but I have to remember that even if the worst thing happens, it's worth it to me to try to be fearless.
Yes. Yeah, it's really good. Like what I think what we usually and we often hear that is to make mistakes and you learn from the mistakes. If you don't make mistakes and you don't be fearless to make that mistakes, you always stay in that point. Like, I don't know, this is what I often hear from a lot of people, from lectures, from yes.
Well,
So
I have two things to say to that, actually. One is from a former teacher of mine, Stephen Gaber, who was principal cellist of the Cleveland Orchestra for many years, one of the most famous orchestras in the world. And he told me in his audition, it was a different time then, but in his audition, he was playing Dvorak concerto and he fell off the cello in the first 10 seconds. And then, the panel were sitting there just kind of laughing, writing him off. And because he had that incident, he wasn't at all afraid to play with his most incredible passion and everything. And he won the job. Even though he made this horrific mistake at the beginning that would usually disqualify you. Having said that, I've made a lot of horrific mistakes at the beginning of auditions that have disqualified me. So don't go out there with the intention of trying to sneak around the system. But the other thing I want to say comes from Peter Dixon, who's the principal cellist of the BBC Philharmonic, who told me that he actually prefers when he hears auditions and somebody comes in and he can tell that they're nervous. He prefers that because when you can, and usually, if you're nervous, you're going to make a few mistakes because you're so on edge with all these, hormones, chemicals that are running through your body. But he says, if somebody's nervous, then I know that they care. And that is really the most important thing.
Yes. Well, yeah. So the next question is, What are some top ways to approach practicing? What is some advice you can give to being a better musician?
Okay, so I've talked a lot about all of my airy fairy philosophical stuff. So I'm going to give you some practical advice I find is really useful for everyone. And it comes from a great blog that you should check out if you don't know it already, everyone who's watching, called The Bulletproof Musician. It's run by people who study performance psychology at the Juilliard School in New York. So I get some of my ideas from there, and it's a great resource. But the first one is, and this is something I do, takes a while to get into, but I actually practice in very, very short chunks, different passages. So let's say I have an hour-long session to practice. I usually do a technical run through every day, which I think is really important. So whatever technique routine you have on your instrument, even if you only practice 10 minutes a day, I think it's great to, at least have, a fifth or a third of your time be focused purely on technique. But I will take an hour of my time and I will work on things in little chunks of about 3 minutes. So a good example is an orchestral excerpt that every string player has to play for orchestral auditions, called Don Juan, which is a tone poem by Richard Strauss. It's very technically difficult and it's really hard to nail it out of context. So what do the orchestras do? They make you play it like completely cold, out of context, in the middle of a audition. So you have to prepare for that massively. It's one of those things you need to spend like just hours and hours and hours getting prepared. So how I approach that, rather than sit through and just slosh away at Don Juan for 2 hours and be bored out of my mind and practice it every way I know, is I take 3 minutes. 3 minutes, I look at a very specific passage, probably under tempo. I can't emphasize enough the importance of practicing slowly and practicing with a metronome, to really establish your internal pulse and figure out where you're tending to do things that aren't musical, but based on other tendencies. And then it doesn't mean I only practiced on one for 3 minutes that day. I'll go and then play a really slow whole tone scale or something, or a thumb position exercise. And I'll go back to that excerpt and I'll do it again. The reason for this, and why it's been so revolutionary in my practice, is that when you are forced to do something out of context like that, you're building what's known as myelin strands in your brain. So it's very, very hard to concentrate and focus like this. And that is the point. The point is to do that because it will make the neural pathways that make you play that stronger, more efficiently. It's kind of like really intense weight training for your brain. The other thing I would say, that's another piece of practical advice that I cannot emphasize enough, and it's true for all instruments, all musicians, is the importance of mental practice. And I remember hearing about mental practice before I really knew what it was, and thinking, oh, well, that's a load of baloney. That's not going to make me play my concerto at, crotchet equals 160. But mental practice is a lot about centering, and a lot of things that are very similar or related to sports psychology. And what happens when you mentally practice, it's something that I think becomes increasingly important as you approach a performance or something that you have a lot of anxiety or fear around. But it's imagining the physical sensation. So if I was playing Haydn D major concerto, I imagine how I start. I imagine how that first note feels when I nail it. And it's good to kind of, when you're practicing and something goes really well, to just take a moment and meditate on how it feels. Not trying to control it, not saying, okay, my hand was exactly like this, and I was da-da-da, and my spike was this height on my cello. No, those things are important in a way, but what's really important is that you remember the physical sensation. Because our brains, it's not a conscious, it's not a, it's a sort of more abstract thing that your brain does. But when you go for the feeling rather than all these other technical things, then you're almost never going to go wrong. And I think that when you do mental practice, it's a lot about, okay, you imagine you're doing this motion, you're going into it. And I think also practicing mentally aspects of musicianship and musicality. So really thinking about the color you want to create, really thinking about the character of a piece, reflecting on that. And just like normal practice, it gets easier and it gets better the more often you do it. So when I have some really big performance, I mean, you mentioned in my introduction that I'm playing Brahms' double concerto. Hopefully it won't get canceled, but in June of this year, as I increasingly get close to that performance, I'm going to be doing more and more and more of that mental practice. So I can't emphasize enough. I think both of those things are really important ways to approach practicing that will help anyone.
Okay, thank you. Wow, like I've learned a lot from here. Like although I don't play the cello, but it's a lot to go in, and wow, I've learned new things. Thank you.
What do you play? I'm curious.
Um, I played the piano and the double bass when
Oh,
I
wow.
was in high school. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's really like how practical, how technical. So it's really like how you shared about the feeling and the practice and how you imagine when you're on stage and how do you nail it. It's really we don't get like if it's student like we are like students playing in school orchestras, we don't really get the especially now. But normally, every year, we do have a yearly concert, and that is the one, mostly like the one day, one night, the most important day we have. Like we practiced, and just like what you said, we get anxious of going up the stage and everything. But I think what you've shared, it really helps, and hopefully students will take this advice and try it maybe next time, but after the pandemic, like
Yeah,
yeah, when they're preparing for a concert or any performance.
definitely.
Okay, so we're moving into what you have your teachers and mentors. So what is the top piece of advice you received from a teacher or mentor in your life?
Okay, well, this is an easy question for me to answer. Probably not that easy for many people, but I was very lucky in my time at Indiana University to study with János Starker, who was one of the most famous cellists of the 20th century. He was Hungarian and he lived through the Second World War, and he was an incredible man. Very controversial in some ways because he was the only person allowed to smoke cigarettes indoors in the 2000s in the entire university. So, he was known for his dry wit and humor and being really merciless in some ways. I mean, he would say some really, really harsh things to people. But he was somebody, I guess at the time I learned with him, he had been teaching for over 50 years. And he, at some point in history, I mean, it changes all the time, but he was the most recorded artist in the world. So very, very prolific. He could play anything. It was just, he was like an alien. But a lot of people have asked me over the years, oh, what did you learn from Starker? Like, what's the best thing he taught you? And I've thought about this question a lot, and it actually wasn't a cello thing. What he told me was, he had this way of speaking. It was you always thought you were getting a compliment, but it wasn't a compliment. So there were two things. The first thing he told me, I remember I went in and played something like really difficult, and he had his cigarette and he said, well, you obviously have a high IQ. Why don't you use it? That's not the most important, but it's just a funny one. The most important thing he told me probably about a year later after that was same thing. He had his cigarette, and I had just played, I think, Mendelssohn D major sonata to him. He sat back in his chair. Mind you, there were always 15 people sitting in the room watching your lessons, and you had to have your work prepared with piano, and you were on this little podium thing. It was always very stressful, but he sat back and he said, well, you're becoming a far better cellist than I ever thought you would be. And the reason That's not me bragging about him thinking I got good. The reason that was the most important thing anyone said to me was because this is somebody who's taught for 50 years, who's had people who've won competitions. He's seen every level of cello playing. He's taught the most incredible artists, some of the most incredible artists that are alive today. And what he would told me in that moment was, look, if I'm wrong, then anyone can be wrong. And it taught me that the most important thing we have in life is what we think of ourselves. No one can tell you you can't do something except yourself, including Janos Starker. So I think that is something that was so invaluable to me, and I hope people will remember that lesson for themselves.
Yes. Wow. Yes. I think it can be applied not only in music or to any musician. I think it can apply to everyone. Like, if you want to do it, no one can stop you. You just do it. Like,
Absolutely.
yes, it. Wow. Okay. So, just a reminder for everyone who has any questions. So you can just submit your question in the Q&A section in Zoom and in the chat box in YouTube. So we're gonna pursue to the next question. So you talk about the idea of mentors, like why are mentors important for all of us, like no matter the stage of your musical career?
Yeah. So just quickly, I'll give you my definition of what a mentor is. Often it can be a teacher or it can be somebody who's older, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But I think having a mentor is somebody who cares about you, not just as what you do professionally, but also as a person, and believes in you. And the reason I think it's so powerful, and I can highlight this from my own life, is that I have a lot of respect for people who I try to live in a way where I look for all the great things that people are doing. So I think, there's some musicians who are really incredible at this. And when you notice those things, it helps you become better because you're seeing all the great things in others, and you yearn to learn from them in that way. So that's kind of just a general thing for people around me. That could be peers or mentors. But when somebody who you massively respect takes an interest in you, it's kind of like this beautiful cycle, because you start to feel overwhelmed with gratitude that this person who is great actually cares about you, and it gives you the sense that you're able to achieve these things. Now, I think a mentor is also somebody who will force you to grow. One of my mentors is Jolie Coos, and she's a very dear friend of mine now as well. But I remember when I would go and see her, I would always have this incredible sense that I was nowhere near my potential as a person, that I had to absolutely find a way to grow. And it wasn't easy, it wasn't easy to hear that, but it was at the same time of being like, wow, I have a lot of work to do. But Jolie has opened my eyes and showed me that I can do that. And because because I've seen it, now I have to. And I think that's why a mentor is important, because a lot of times, and it's not that everything we do in life you have to do to your fullest potential. But I feel that if you're passionate about something and you care about it, then you want to, you want to, it's not about being the best. It's not, for me anyway, it's not about ego, and it's not about people venerating how great you are. It's about what you love and bringing that to the next level. So I think having a mentor is really important for that. And I think mentoring people, again, and it doesn't matter what stage you are in your life, there's always somebody who you can guide by giving them advice, or, and it's not unsolicited advice, of course, but I think we underestimate the power of really valuing others. So, when you see a young person who does something great, and, I would just say an aside, and I'm not making any judgments, but I think the classical music world is a lot of times driven a lot by shame and fear. So sometimes people have an instinct when they see something great happening. It makes them worried about themselves. They feel, oh, well, that's not so good because they come up with reasons because they actually themselves feel worried. What if that person encroaches on me? And what if they get better? Well, so what if they do? If they do, then great. Like, then there's more going on. That's positive. So I think we don't always look for opportunities to reach out and say, hey, that thing you made, that, recording with yourself that's on YouTube. Oh, it's super cool. I love that, And we do this for friends, don't we? We do this for friends and people we truly care about. But it's another thing to reach out to those and have the self-awareness to say, hey, I don't need to be afraid. I need to help people who I think are doing great things. So that's why I think mentorship is important, but also why having a mentor, it forces us to grow in a way that's really positive.
Yes, thank you very much. So, as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra has involved itself in a variety of activities. On behalf of the JPO, we would like to ask your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, how would you suggest the JPO and its members further improve itself?
Oh, great question. Well, I think you guys are doing fabulous stuff. I've seen some of your interviews that you've done like this, and I think it's just so fantastic. Like, you all should be so proud of yourselves and all you're doing with outreach and getting out into the communities. I think, honestly, I think like the world needs more of this right now, and everything you stand for is, I'm absolutely 100% behind. I think I've probably, said a lot of what I want to say, what people should do, but I think be motivated by your passion and don't, we have so many we have so many opportunities in life to be ashamed and to be afraid and to be worried about what people think about us. And music, unfortunately, because it's something where you have to bear it all, can bring out those tendencies. But it's a choice, right? It's a choice, and we don't have to decide to be motivated by those things. So I think all that you're doing is just really wonderful, and I hope you keep going and get a huge following. And I'm going to tell all my friends and colleagues about what you're doing because I think it's great.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to move into the Q&A section. So we'll see what questions do we have from other panelists, and any questions. Someone just said awesome. It was very awesome and very inspiring. Like, awesome stuff, Katie. Thanks for the inspiration, someone said.
Yeah, that's Kai Erin. That's Bernie. She's a really good friend of mine. But I think
okay. So there's someone anonymous from someone's, which says, "Hi, what's your opinion regarding diversity as a cellist? Do you think it is something a cellist must acquire in order to do well as a cellist?"
Oh, very good question. Very interesting. I think I could interpret this a lot of different ways. So diversity, I mean, we could talk about ethnic diversity, we could talk about background, and creative musical approach. Let's see, do you think it is something a cellist must acquire? Well, it's an interesting one. I think that you have to think about what you're passionate about. So, for example, since lockdown in the UK, I've been doing a lot of work with folk musicians. And one of the musicians I worked with is classically trained, but only kind of realized recently that she's really, really in love with the folk music from her local area. Her name's Annie Ball. And it's one of those things that's not necessarily diversity, right? Because it's being authentic to where you're from. But I think that there's a lot of power in that. So, for example, if you're somebody from Malaysia and you're really, really passionate about the music you grew up with, that you should embrace that. You shouldn't think, well, I have to like only play Sevchek studies and like all this stuff. So I would say it's important to embrace it that way. And I think it's also important to keep an open mind. I think as an artist, I have to be a beacon of acceptance. So I look at all genres and all styles of music, and I try to see the validity and the importance in all of them. Because I think if I don't do that, then who is going to do that? Why should I care? Why should the taxi driver who's taking me to the airport care about what I do if I'm not going to have an open mind to that? So I think in that sense, don't say, if you play an instrument, and you can think this, you can say like, I don't like jazz, I don't like country music, I don't like bluegrass. Well, fine, but have an open mind to it at least. You don't have to sit around and listen to it on your CD player in your free time or your Spotify. Just it's important, I'd say.
Yes, thank you. So there's another question from someone. So they say, thank you, Katie, for this cello power community. How can one join? And is there any prerequisite requirement before one can join?
Oh, great question. So the page is called, and I can maybe type it in a comment somewhere after this broadcast, but it's patreon.com/cello power. And Patreon is actually a website that's set up for artists so that people can, support artists and stuff like that. We're really not interested in, earning money from this, but the reason why it's behind a paywall, and it's £3 a month. It's like, I think $4 a month. And we're actually thinking about making a spectator level that's even lower. But the reason it's behind a paywall is just because the internet, unfortunately, is filled with lots of people who aren't as enlightened as all of us. And, we're doing things there that really take a lot of vulnerability and a lot of, self-exploration. And we want it to be a safe community that people can only be part of if they're interested in that. You know what I mean? So it's for everyone. Right now, it's mainly focused on some really technical cello things, but as we expand, we have some guest artists coming on this week. Really incredible cellist Christian Elliott is going to be on later this week. We're going to have many different artists, hopefully Simon Trubetsky, hopefully some musicians from Sweden and Colorado in the USA and lots of other places. So it's for everyone.
Amazing. Okay, and one more. They say, hi, do you have any advice for someone who is thinking of pursuing music as a career in a time like this, like during the pandemic?
Wow, that is another great question. And I first just want to say that I think the generation who are learning music and are living through this are going to be some of the strongest people I know and when it's all over, because I think that there's two ways to look at this pandemic. One is everything's over and the world is collapsing and there's so many horrible things. But I think another way to look at it is that, the difficulties we go through in life can often help make us stronger as people. So I would say that, be true to yourself. So much about music is the long game anyway. I mean, when I would wake up early on a Saturday morning, spend all day in the music building in college, you're not thinking about your social life in that moment. You're thinking about long-term goals. And so I think have faith in that. And also don't be afraid to explore your creativity. There are so many paths to making a living in music. And the most important thing is that you're willing to work really, really hard and that you're willing to be motivated by the things that you love. And that you might have to, I think that the next generation anyway is going to have to be much more creative about where they get their work and how they get their work. So, the sky's the limit is what I would say.
Okay, thank you. And I hope everyone had their question answered. So now I would like to thank you so much, Katie, for your responses and your sharing. But sorry, everyone, we are coming to the end for tonight's broadcast. So, a friendly reminder for everyone, our broadcast will be taking a rest this Sunday, which is the 14th of February, due to Chinese New Year period, and will resume the coming Wednesday. So it's the 17th of February, as usual. We would like to remind everyone that our JBO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. Join us next time with our next guest, as will be posted near the time. More details can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on the YouTube channel, along with past webinars and the soon-to-be broadcasted interviews. So feel free to share the Zoom webinar registration link, JPO YouTube channel, and the JPO Facebook page with your friends and family. For our YouTube audience, if you're enjoying our program, please show your support by pressing the like and subscribe button down below. You guys have been an amazing audience. We from the JVO family wishes that everyone stay safe and healthy as facing this crisis together. So now I will lead the prayer to end tonight's program. Please pray in whatever faith you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the wonderful time we had during this interview. I pray that you bless Katie Tertell abundantly in all her music career, her music path, no matter in present or in the future. We pray that everyone's staying strong during this pandemic and give us strength to overcome during these difficult times. We pray for the frontliners and those who must travel to work. As God, you provide protection and healthy bodies to fight this pandemic. I thank you, Lord, for everything you provide. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So thank you very much, Katie, for sharing with us tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Wishing everyone a happy Chinese New Year and see you all next time. Good night.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's been great to be
Thank
here.
you.